Welcome to Splunk Talk, the Splunk podcast that's all Splunk and no junk. I am your host, Burch, and he is...
Hal.
We've got a great episode for you today here at Conf 21. We're going to have Antoine Toulmy join us in just a minute to talk about blockchain. But before we get into any of that, quick gracious thank you to Splunk TV for providing us yet another opportunity to broadcast our love for Splunk through our podcast here live at Conf. Hal, how has your Conf been so far? Have you seen any great sessions? Yeah, lay it on me, man.
It's been great. I'm having a lot of fun. I do have to admit something, just to you privately, Birch. I took a work meeting in between. Yeah, it was on my calendar. Like I just kind of like meeting, and I just like accidentally joined a work meeting right in the middle of Conf. See, that is the singular downside to a virtual Conf. Actually, I will say that's the accident. It's just I couldn't help it.
Yeah, it becomes a little harder to just cancel out everything on the calendar. Like when you're on site. Yeah. Are you going to be okay? Like, do you need?
Yeah, I think I'll be okay. I think I'll be okay. I did actually block out my calendar, but these things that they kind of sneak up.
Hal, I think you're asking for a hug. I think that's what's happening.
I do actually. What I want to do, I want to talk about. We'd asked a couple of our friends at the company some questions just to kind of see what Splunkers were thinking about, kind of headed into Conf, and I asked. Let's see. I asked the sales engineering crew. I said, what are some interesting bits of trivia? And I asked product what their favorite, underutilized feature was, and I asked the support folks what were some of their favorite tips, and I asked the professional services folks, what were some of their favorite tips, coming from a little bit different angle. We got several interesting responses, and let me see. I'll pull out a couple of those right now. Let me see. Here we go. Matthew asks or says that, did you know? Actually, do you know what year Splunk became profitable?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with 2018.
No, it was a little further back. 2009. Close.
Oh, 2009?
Yeah, you were close.
Gap reporting or not gap reporting?
You know what? I'm not even going to go there because I don't want to understand that. I do kind of sort of understand it. Like I sort of know.
You want to leave that as a gap in your mind?
Yeah. Okay, but Joseph tells us that there's an Easter egg in the Splunk Mon SPLUNKMON binary, and it's Pikachu. I did not know this, so now you know.
Now I know. I do know of some other Easter eggs, but that is not one that I know.
Well, you can share them if you like.
I can't share them.
Meantime, I'll pull up the.
I'm sworn to secrecy.
The one
secrecy.
We had a bunch of people who did say read the docs. Like seriously, read the docs. That is the tip is to read the documentation. And the funny thing is, like, I mean, if you've been listening to the Splunk Talk podcast, you probably know this already. But we had Chris Gales on. I don't remember what month that was. Birch, do you? It's probably in springtime.
Oh yeah, that was. I'm gonna say episode 3 of season 2.
Yeah, probably. And so he runs the doc team here, has for quite a long time, and he has a lot to say on the matter. So if you're interested in kind of like how we do docs, and docs is the product, that was a good episode. Go check that out. But anyway, read the docs for real.
Read the docs.
Let's see. Bosley has a good tip here. Ooh. Telnet is your friend when troubleshooting issues between forwarders and indexers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Telnet is your friend.
And put OpenSSL on those endpoints, and you can troubleshoot sometimes when you like have trouble with certificates or something.
Yeah, but definitely before you even go down that path, you just want to make sure that there's network connection. You can get there.
Yeah, that's going to be a big one. You can't actually connect between.
Yeah.
Let's see. Here's one from Dave, and I like the way that he said we're talking about test and development and prod, and his point is everyone has a test environment. Some folks also have a production environment. Think about that. Like,
Is that like I
yeah,
don't test my code, but when I do it in production?
yes, yes, it's one of those.
I worked with I don't know if you remember Terry, but he and I worked
Mhm.
together some time ago. I think you used to work
Which
with him,
Terry
and
Martin?
yeah, and
Yeah.
he gave me a quote that I just had my conf talk about an
Mhm.
hour ago,
Cool, cool.
and I always love to reiterate his point that uh, if someone depends on it, then it's production. And that was very true for me, because I worked at when I was a customer, I was in some places where I came in and they were like, "Well, no, we send the QA data to a QA instance of Splunk. We send dev data to a dev instance of Splunk." But people like the stress and performance team were
But those
very
teams were using it
that
for
was
production
production for them,
reasons.
yeah. And then we all always had that issue of, "Hey, why does this not work in production, but it works in QA?" Well, how
Mhm.
can we correlate those logs if we have them in those different environments? Sure, we can stand up a search head that can search across the two, but
Yeah,
it starts to beg the question of like, let's just have everything go to production, all that
yeah,
data
yeah,
go to production, and then we have our own non-production environments for testing new releases
yeah.
Splunk or Splunk
Yeah,
apps.
like
Yeah,
testing integrations and yeah.
yeah,
Let me do a couple more, tips real quick, and
yeah,
then we'll get into the discussion. Let's see. So I asked the professional consultants also, and I said to everybody, I said the same thing. I said the rules are be concise. One sentence kind of thing. The PS guys, they're like, here's a paragraph and here's a paragraph. It was kind of funny, predictable.
yeah.
Let's see. Tyler reminds us that Splunk is very IO centric, IO bound often when you're kind of building out the architecture. Um,
By the way, that's
so
my favorite Beatles album,
yeah, yeah,
IO Bound. Yeah,
yeah, that's a good one. Um,
yeah. You know what? That should be Simon and
the
Garfunkel, Homeward Bound. Yeah. Go ahead.
okay. Yeah. Well, now I want to listen to some music. Anyway,
No junk, just
um,
Splunk.
Tyler says, when you're thinking about how to build this architecture out,
Yeah.
anything once you get kind of like I don't know, a terabyte a day
Mm.
of size of your environment, you need to really think for just super hard, super heavy IO, like a Hadoop cluster, like a data warehouse. It's like that. It's not. You can't just stick it in a VM with a little bit of slices of CPU and RAM and storage and be good. It's not going to work out.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel like that was a very common thing when I was a sales engineer is we would talk to people and they'd say like, "Oh yeah, the environment's not very performant." And the first thing was always, "Wait, they're all running it on a virtualized machine, like a slice, but it's all hosted on the same physical server." So their entire Splunk stack was
yeah,
really
yeah.
one
It
machine, and so
didn't
it's competing
actually
against itself. Yeah.
right, right. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. They're all trying to do the same thing at the same time. So
Physics.
if you're trying to like slice one, thing into 20 things, like yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't work out. A couple more real quick. Dave,
Yeah.
he's a little
I like
self-serving.
these.
Dave, bring in professional services if you haven't done this before. Like,
Oh.
I mean, some of this stuff is rather complicated. I want it to be easier,
Well, you know
but
what? I'm gonna
trying to
disagree
solve
with
these
that
big,
one.
giant enterprise problems in a complex enterprise, then you gotta take a lot of stuff into account. That's all.
Yeah,
What were you gonna say?
I'm gonna challenge that one because one of the
Mm,
things that I love about Splunk was that I started with it on my laptop
sure.
and then scaled from there.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would actually encourage people get your feet wet, get your hands wet, get your hands dirty and your feet dirty. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
download it, play with it
Mhm.
because on your own machine, like you can't break anything, right? Like you're just mucking around, sending some of your own machine data in, get a feel
Yeah.
for it, and then once you realize that you're not comfortable or you're trying to do something at massive scale, yeah, bring in the experts. Just like when you're at home and you trying to do
Mm,
plumbing on your own, and then you realize, yeah, now I have a leak. I'm going to bring in a plumber.
yeah. Alright, 2 more quick ones, real quick. Alok in PS, he says,
Uh,
once your environment gets a certain size, maybe 10 indexers, you really gotta think about automation. So you do not wanna be, logging into these servers and doing something once. You need to automate how that's done. He likes Ansible. I like Ansible. Ansible's it's a fine tool. There's a lot of these tools, different ones for different purposes, but do, automate your system configuration in Splunk. It'll pay it back
What kind of
dividends.
stuff would you recommend putting in Ansible that you wouldn't otherwise have in like a cluster master or a deployment server if you're not clustered?
It it's not that you don't use those, it's that you manage the framework of how you use those things. It gets a little meta, but like you're going to in the deployment server, what do you give it? You give it apps, and those apps have conf files, right? Well,
Mm.
where do you store the apps? You store the apps in source code repository like a Git or whatever, and then you manage the checkout of that into the place where deployment server will get it and then distribute it. That's one way. But also, like, you think about the what is it, serverclasses.conf? Is that the one where you list out your
Yeah.
devices? How do you manage that file? You shouldn't manage that by hand. You should refer to inventory that exists outside of there and then generate the contents of that file. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm just very embarrassed because I still manage it by hand.
Well, do you have 10 indexers, Birch?
I am. I don't. I, I'm
See?
afraid of embarrassing myself.
All right, fine. Okay, one last one.
Yeah.
From product, I asked what was their favorite kind of least utilized feature, and Haley
Mm.
says the auto regress command. And I have actually never used this one, but her tip is you use auto regress followed by sort, and then a field equals previous field. It's great for doing some quick transaction-esque tracking. So
Oh, that's
I would
cool.
have to dig into that. But I know there's some really neat things that you can do with the search language to take, problems that they look like problems that, oh, hey, transaction is doesn't scale. Well, okay, you can use sort, you can use auto regress. There's other ways, stats,
Right.
lat, whatever. There's other ways to do it. But anyway, thank you everybody that submitted some tips. Now,
That was great.
Birch,
What?
what's next?
What's next? I don't know. I thought we'd sit here in silence for a while. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, about
Okay.
20 minutes.
Commence. Yeah, 20 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
Actually,
You are pleased, though.
um, I
No,
can't believe that's
we
the
could bring the guest
first time anyone's ever applauded for us.
on. Ouch.
Um, ouch. No, I think we have a special guest that we want to bring on and revisit a topic that we talked about some time ago, but go a little deeper in it. Does that sound good to you, Hal?
I think that's a grand idea.
Okay, well then, Red Rover, send Antoine over.
All right.
Now
So that's
here's the applause.
No.
Woo!
Hey.
Antoine, it's sunny where you are. Besides your disposition, it does look bright in the room. Where are you that it is sunny?
It is my very own garage, and I have a very warm light coming from this lamp right over here to give me a little bit of a nice tan to go with the French accent.
Oh, a French. Are you in a place where people speak French?
No, I'm in San Jose, California. Been here for a little while.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's there are quite a few French in the Bay, but yeah, we mostly speak English around here.
So how long
Nice.
have you been in the States?
Oh, I moved here over 10 years ago now, so
Okay.
pretty much as
What if
new
he
to the
said 10
CMB.
minutes?
I would have,
Thing.
I would have asked him, what was his meal last night, because I'm kind of fascinated. French cuisine is probably the hardest to find in my area. If you just think about some of the more popular cuisines in the world, there's no French places around, so I know very little about it, and I do enjoy food.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we make our own ratatouille. My wife made some ratatouille last night. We grow our own veggies at this point. We got the eggplants going. We have some, so a whole garden in the front yard. We have some fruit trees as well. We got some pomegranates that are coming to fruition. We're gonna make some jam this weekend, hopefully.
neat.
So
And
that,
if you weren't hungry yet, you are now.
My dinner is literally like, if we can end early, like I'm hungry. So let's
Oh,
go.
okay. Priorities over here.
No, I do
Well,
talk
it
to
looks
you.
like we got the U.S. Coasts covered over here. We've got Hal and myself over on the East Coast, Antoine over on the West
Mhm.
Coast. Antoine, every guest we always like to start out first, I'd love to hear, just what are you working on here at Splunk, and then we'd love to hear your origin story. So,
And I always ask
what
people,
you did before, and yeah, go ahead, Hal.
and I always ask people to recite prime numbers, starting with their favorite,
Oof.
and then working backwards in order of preference.
I'll go with what.
Never mind. We'll just do the origin story. Yeah. So just kind of tell us how you came to be at Splunk.
Sure. So what I do at Splunk is I managed our blockchain team. Our blockchain team has been mostly helping Splunk customers embrace all use cases around blockchain. So anything around monitoring blockchain nodes and software, or building on top of ledger data, so we can actually have analytics and dashboards based on blockchain activity. There was a great talk today from BlockFi where one of the presenters actually made this distinction very well. He said, hey, on one end, you have all the software you have to now make sense of, right? So it's nothing, just like a database, just like everything else, you now have to take into account this new software. And on top of that, the software is emitting a large amount of data that you're going to have to account for. So all this is going to run on your ledger. It's going to have to make sense. It's going to have to part of your security. Some of those attacks are going to happen directly on the ledger. You're going to make sense of
We're going to have to slow you down and back up and kind of establish some baseline for a lot of people that might be generalists and really want to understand, okay, what is a ledger in this context. So we're going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do that, I do want to kind of like go back in time a little bit and understand, like, what did you do before Splunk? How long have you been at Splunk, and kind of where are you coming from? We can kind of, so I want to get back to the DLT. I promise we will.
Mm-hmm.
Sure thing. I joined Splunk at a very interesting moment. I joined Splunk in March 2020. So pretty much I joined Splunk the office, right? That was in the pandemic. That was because of me, right? I don't know if you knew this, but so I've been to the office now twice. So I now know that there's an office. I can confirm it, and it's an interesting place. It's very nice.
Yeah.
But mostly, I haven't actually met my team face to face ever since I joined Splunk.
Yeah, weird.
So it's extremely weird. I only know the front of the face. I don't know if they have the back to their head yet. We have to work on that.
Yeah, Nate does. Stephen does not. I don't know. It's just weird. Yeah, interesting fact.
And yeah, I mean, it might get disturbing at some point. So
they're just a facade, like the houses that they film movies at. Yeah,
it's actually two-dimensional. Everything.
Yeah, they wear a paper mask, and just something here. And so our team is about 6-7 people. We're very much an exploratory team. We're trying to really help customers at Splunk understand how to use blockchain in their journey, how to make sense of that. And before that, I was already in blockchain. So before that, I was actually working on some of the protocol development for Ethereum at Consensus. I was building all sorts of interesting constructs, and that even became eventually an open source project from which I'm still a committer to this day, called Hyperledger Besu, which is an Ethereum client. If you run this, then you can actually synchronize with the chain. You can participate in blockchain.
Right.
So
awesome. So let's pull apart some of these concepts and just kind of make sure that everybody understands it enough to know, why are we bothering? Like, why at Splunk, why is it important to us that we think that we have something to add to this space, which is a little complicated. I mean, I think it's fair to say that this is a complicated area. And in order to, I've gone through this kind of phase of like, understanding what a new technology is. You have all these terms, and some of them in blockchain and distributed ledger, they're not very natural. Like it's you have analogies that work, like mining. People at this point, they kind of understand that, okay, I'm mining something. Bitcoin didn't exist as one cryptocurrency example, and then it existed because we did a thing, and we call that mining. But why does it have to be that way? Why does it take so much power and effort to computational power to do that? So there's you have the kind of like, this is a currency or a collectible. We're trading money. There's no centralized party. So I understand all these concepts, kind of going through that kind of learning process. You're way ahead of me, right? You're in the depth of it and thinking about the protocols and what's going to be important to somebody that is building products in that space. Kind of take us through the like what is important to build a new blockchain out, or what is Hyperledger and how's that connect to things. So let's talk about some of those.
Let's talk about important stuff, huh? So
yeah. And just to show how complex this topic is, we had Nate on for an episode to talk about blockchain, and it's so dense, or we're so dense that we're revisiting it. I think a great Hal, you queued up a lot. Like there are certainly a lot of topics that like the analogies and everything.
One of those like 20-part questions. I did, didn't I?
Yeah, let's start with the why. Like what pain point does blockchain solve?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. So
he's like going to change careers. You know what? Never mind.
He regrets being here.
It's a very slow database. That's what it is, right?
A very slow database.
Okay.
That everybody gets a copy of. You can have it on your hard drive. It starts pretty small. After millions of blocks, you start having 500 gigabytes worth of data that you're storing, right? And the only value that this blockchain has is that eventually everybody has agreed on those blocks. Everybody has agreed of the value that were stored on that ledger, right? So the ledger that I was alluding to earlier is that it's a database that has been ordered according to transactions. So you can actually walk back those things one by one, and you can make sure that you come to the same conclusion as everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
The value of that is, well, have you ever tried to have an Excel spreadsheet that you would share with colleagues and you would send it to each other over email? That's the stuff right there, right?
Is it at its core solving for like consensus authority? Like we all agree that this thing is true because we all have evidence that it happened. And
yes,
and at its core is it like at its core, that's what blockchain is trying to do. And you mentioned right off the bat, it's slow, which tells me the point here is not to create a performant thing. The point here is to create an authority.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
And you want to be as authoritative as possible, as secure as possible, right? So, for example, for Bitcoin, it would take 10 minutes for you to get to the next block because on purpose they make that slow to have maximum security there, right? They don't want to mess around. The interesting part too is that that it's probabilistic. So your block is not final until there's enough blocks on top of it that there's a very small chance that your block is reverted. So it's possible that the top of the chain might not be wrong always, right? But over time, it will kind of straighten up and create a straight line by which you can say that there is only one truth. Right?
So let me compare that to the status quo of a different payment system. And first of all, I'm stimulating that we're talking about a payment system, and maybe we should make the point later that these are not necessarily payment systems. But anyway, I write a check. So we'll think in old school. I write a check, I give it to somebody, and then
I'll take it.
Somebody else, takes the check, and you deposit the check, right? So that's like, days of processing. And then you go, or you log on to something that is pretty automatic, pretty quick and seamless. Like I issue a payment to, from my bank to another bank. I know it's going to show up, but still a day or two, right? Or if I sell stock, the trade happens immediately, but the settlement actually takes a few days. So I feel like even though it's a slow database, we've still actually progressed in a significant fashion if you think about it.
Absolutely. The only issue you're going to have if you use this system is if you try to use it as a database in the first place, right? So if you try to store every full attribute, every color of the rainbow, that you keep changing those things, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And what you want to do instead is to use it as a source of truth for payments, just like that, indeed, or as proofs that you can send to the chain. And those proofs can actually be now, this is maybe I'm going to confuse you a little bit, but those proofs can actually be the proof of multiple things that happen, right?
Mhm.
So you wouldn't just send a proof of one thing, but you can actually send a proof that 10 things happen in that particular order. You can summarize that proof down to a smaller chunk of data and send it to the chain. So you can actually now cheat a little bit and go a little bit faster about
So you can sort of like batch.
You can batch
up
exactly.
things.
Okay.
Thank you.
So go ahead, Burch.
Well, your example, Hal, was stimulating because it made me realize, like,
Thank you.
what is flawed about the way that I like write a check is a bad example, but let's say that I like Venmo
Sure.
Hal money.
Yeah, please.
Venmo, like, I mean, well, I guess
$50.
that's like the same system, but and he cashes it out. He deposits the money I gave him, so that's two different systems: Venmo and his bank, the Bank of Hal. When he's like cashing out, you know, one company says to the other, "Hey, I'm giving you this money." That seems to work well. How would blockchain enhance that? And I only pick, again, finance because that is a common transaction format. Similarly, I could say I'm giving Hal my my lip balm.
Well, we have enough time. We'll get into some of the non-stuff. Let's answer this one first.
Yeah.
Like what's better improved, by this system?
Venmo is fine. You should use Venmo with Hal unless you realize something. If you use Venmo a little bit, you'll see that the fees on Venmo is actually pretty big, right?
Okay.
It's not free.
Well, for personal,
it's not for all. They're 10% fees, so you actually pay quite a bit. The other thing is, you know Hal, right? You know him very well. You know he knows you. He trusts you. How about?
Well, I know him. I don't know if he trusts me.
Oh, shoot. Here we go. Well, then Hal is actually a great candidate for this.
As if, the listeners and viewers, they can imagine if you trusted me. Okay.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
Pretend.
Right.
Pretend.
But no, you can also do a number of interesting use cases on blockchain here. One of them that I like a lot came up, I think, a year or two ago. It was called Sablier, which was a small startup, for example, where they were actually doing payment streaming. So you would pay by the minute, and it would actually be algorithmically based on the blockchain, so that you would actually have a way to pay Hal, for example, for how much time he would spend with you on a podcast, for example. So you would be able to trigger payment at the start of the podcast. Every minute spent with you is this much. And he could actually check his funds as it went through, right, as part of this. Right? So you can have multiple waves of payment. You can do different types of remittance. You can do, immediately you could pay him, but you could also put a stopgap order. You can have different types, all the credit, shenanigans you can use, right, with your friends.
Okay,
you could also
that's
do
an interesting one. So I want to go ahead and finish your thought, and then I want to pivot a little bit.
I'll finish my thought. I think you might quite like it. I'm not sure. So let's say you and Hal decide to go on a weekend trip, and you'd like to put some money together so you can get yourself a good, hotel in Las Vegas or something, right? So you're going to put money together. How would you go about doing that? Well, crypto is one way you could possibly do that, right? Where you would be having an account that then could be the place where all the money goes, and it's your party account. That's where it's stored. You all put to the pot, 200, and you go then hit the casinos, and this is how you're going to have a good night. So that's a possibility you wouldn't have with Venmo, for example. And I'm barely touching the surface.
When we're talking about things that have nothing to do with payments necessarily, and Tom mentioned in chat an example that's I love, which is home titles. How would home titles be enhanced by this technology, or property titles?
So that's interesting because it's been on and off for such a long time. When I was at Consensus, that was already the talk of the street. I've had different discussions with others. The reality of it is that I think there are multiple competing initiatives around this market, and you have to think about it in a way where let's say you want to own a property in a very interesting market. You don't have enough money to pay for this, but you could put money together with tens of friends, right? And it would become an investment. Um, then you could put all this money against the title, which would then be digitized on the chain, and then you would be able to share the rent money, for example, across all 10s of you using this approach. All the money could just leave on the account as it goes. The problem with this type of arrangements is that if you use a company to help you with this, they're going to take quite a bit of money. It's going to be quite expensive. It's going to be quite difficult for you to make that happen, right? So how would you go about doing that in a way that would be tokenized, in a way where you would be a little faster at those transactions? You would be able to, for example, sell your portion of that title and sell it to someone else who could then participate. And even though nobody else in the assembly knows that person, they can still trust him or her to abide by the rules that you set at the onset when you bought the property, right? So this adds more liquidity to how you behave. It adds more possibilities for you to play along with this type of titles. I think real estate is a bit of overregulated, so it's not as much interesting. There are some interesting use cases on crypto, even on very simple things. If you think about it, if you have crypto money, one way you can make money right away is you can place it into a locked account and use it to lend it to others and make interest on that, right? Are you familiar with that concept at all?
Say it one more time. You
like
can
decentralized finance.
That is the one of the, like a year ago, that came out. That was what they call the DeFi summer, where people started being able to lock their native crypto money and gain interest by making that available to others, so they could have more liquidity. So think of this
It's
as
really interesting because it's kind of like you have Wall Street doing their things, and everybody, well, not everybody, but most people kind of understand what that kind of capital market, what they're doing. And then you look and see what's being done in this, finance area in blockchain. It's like, you don't even understand the words. Like, there is so much innovation in there. It's hard to tell, like, okay, what's actually valuable? What's going to be significant to track? We only have a few minutes left, so I want to kind of maybe turn this into the kind of the last thinking here. But what's important, and maybe kind of how can we help?
so. We're having a blast because this year Splunk has been really, really successful at lending a lot of folks and prospects in the blockchain sector. We're seeing a huge maturation of the blockchain industry. So a year ago, I would have told you, hey, we need to go to traditional finance, traditional companies that are interested in piloting crypto. What we're seeing now is that crypto native companies are buying Splunk because they need that, because the market is maturing, because now we have a need for security that's not going away. All the core Splunk use cases apply to all the crypto companies that are becoming now public, right? That are becoming now extremely successful.
Mhm.
So we used to be more interested in how we could bring traditional companies into this. Now we're seeing how can we bring new companies into Splunk, and that's a very different problem. So we just talked about those companies that are building stuff on top of the chain. I had an interesting conversation with a customer a month ago. They don't have an AWS account, but the company is working very well. They're printing money right now because everything is on chain. So they moved away from having the need to have their own infrastructure for everything that is secured to instead trusting the chain to secure their assets and build on top. And now what's really interesting for them is to be able to react in a minute when they see something happening on chain. So
What does a
can you
minute
help me?
mean in this context, in the sense that, like, how important is a minute? Maybe that kind of helps people to understand and relate to, okay, I know what Splunk is. I know I have to, a server might go down, and it's going to impact, the ability for somebody to log into my website. What does that minute
Yes.
mean in this world?
Well, let me reframe it. You just mentioned Wall Street earlier. Wall Street is 9 to 5 EST, Monday, Friday. Crypto never sleeps. If you go on Twitter and you talk to crypto people, they're very, very tired, right? Sunday 2 a.m. is the favorite time for an outage. And those outages are not just theirs, but pretty much because it's a distributed network, your stuff will be broken by someone else's machine you never heard about before.
Mm-hmm.
So your security vectors are much harder to secure. Your problems are much bigger, and there's a block every certain seconds. So when you get hacked, you have to know right away that someone is actually using your code incorrectly, sending the wrong parameters to your contract, and starting to get in and starting to get your money away from example, your liquidity pool or the assets you had lost, right? So you have to be able to react right away. And I'm not kidding about the minutes. It's this much that you need to be able to move that fast because they will drain your accounts pretty quick. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and we had, my apologies, we actually have a little more time than I thought. I was off on the time. So we do have time for some more questions. And
You know,
go ahead, Burch.
Well, I just realized sort of like a basic concept here that maybe Antoine pointed out and it just clicked. You mentioned like, oh, with Venmo they take fees. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, sure, like if there was a blockchain provider, why wouldn't they take fees? If there's an opportunity to make money, why would you not take money? And what I realized is that I was overlooking, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that because this is like a shared thing, it's almost like it's open source. So am I correct in drawing the conclusion that like, oh, no, it's not like possible to like make money off your transaction because I mean, like I could be an institution that chooses to like charge you for doing a blockchain transaction, but like the ledger of it is shared. It's everyone is doing it. So it's not like everyone is like charging. Like, is that the premise here? Is that like it's almost like it's open source?
Yeah, there was a trend on Twitter for a while where they would point out that there's actually a flat fee per transaction. And the fee, for example, is going to be the same if you're moving $25 million or if you're moving $5. So, Venmo might be competitive if you're thinking about just paying for your lunch with Hal. But if you're moving your life savings, if you're saving, moving quite a bit of money, it's really interesting to be able to do that with a flat type of pricing. So that does change the liquidity, the picture of that. It removes some of the requirements. It makes it a little easier on people.
Hal, what were you going to ask?
I was going to ask about. Okay, so there's a lot of there's not one coin. There's not one chain. There's dozens and hundreds of them. So how is it that these things? I mean, are they meant to interoperate? Are there things that you can do, on one that you can't do on another that matter to at the end of the day of solving some of these distributed consensus problems?
Yes, there are definitely different use cases in different ways that people have gone about blockchain. You can think of the Bitcoin blockchain as the first one that was more based around the idea of receipts. So you send money and you receive a receipt. So it's not. I'm not going to explain that just now, but it's very much money based and payments based. And in Ethereum, there's now the notion of smart contracts where you can deploy code that is going to algorithmically execute when you send the right parameters to either send money transactions across different actors. So you now have the ability to do a lot more, where you could, for example, lock some assets between different transactions, pay multiple people at once, et cetera, right? And we're seeing even more than that now. We're seeing chains that have taken this initiative of saying we're going to have multiple chains talk to each other. And this is going to be, for example, Polkadot or Cosmos, which have built protocols for different chains to interchange between each other. All those chains can talk to each other using what we call bridges. And those bridges are super interesting. They're big points of attack, as you can imagine, because this is where I would go if I was to hack into a chain. There's vulnerabilities because you have now two consensus algorithms that are competing to see which one is going to be final. And maybe to kind of like lift the veil a little bit, when you send dollars to euros, there isn't a magic moment where your dollars become euros, right? What happens is that you pay dollars to an account, and some other account credits your euro account with euros, right? It's the exact same thing that's happening with blockchains. You send your tokens to a locked account, which is going to lock those bitcoins, for example. And on the receiving end, in your Ethereum chain, for example, we're going to create tokens that represent your bitcoins and make them available to you on that Ethereum chain. So that becomes a great source of tension between all those different protocols to make sure that they are agreeing on what those tokens represent and making sure nobody gets hacked, and there's no disproportion between those different activities. But that is happening now.
So just because we are coming up on time here, let's connect it back to Splunk. What I'm hearing is a computer-based way of like communicating and recording activity, and I have to imagine Splunk becomes a great platform to even just monitor like what's the health and security of the infrastructure, albeit distributed, but there's still like transactions, there's network traffic, there's things happening on these different systems. And I imagine at its most basic, you're monitoring some of those things, and the use cases can be a little more specialized because it's a little more mature than just some individual company monitoring their custom application logs. These are things that are like generally agreed. What is that accurate? And are there other avenues? What's your take on it? Like how do you see Splunk getting used for this?
Oh, so we've had some interesting discussion around that use case for companies, for example, that are asking us, we'd love to understand the sentiment of people who use our stuff. Are they using other applications on chain besides us? Are they using our competitors? Now we can actually do real data science on everything that's happening on the chain between all the different aspects and all the different people who participate. They also want to understand who is a faithful customer of ours, who should we reward with interest, how should we peg, and what dimension and what next strategic initiative should we take, right? So there's really a number of insights you can get from that data, which are going to not just be tactical, even security-based, but become part of the strategy. It can even be a community asset. So, for example, we've had discussions with folks who want to have a public dashboard they can show to the community, showing that their whole chain is secure, and they're trying to breach 5 different chains at the same time, right? So how would you show that for them to be able to say, hey, it's okay, you can work with us, you should come over because Splunk has shown that our stuff is not on fire, right?
Nice. So we're right up on time here. Is there like a URL or an app or something people can look at to learn more or double click on this?
Sure. You can learn more about us at unblock.splunkdlt.com.
Nice.
That is our one pager. It's also a public Splunk dashboard that we have published with our UDF publisher. So it's pretty awesome.
Nice.
Great. Thanks a lot for spending some time with us, Antoine. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
No problem.
Really appreciate
Anytime.
it. Thanks for making it to Splunk Talk. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and happy Splunking, everyone.
See you in the morning.
Cheers.